Hey everybody, welcome back to Bible from the Duns. Today we're in John chapter number 4, so let's get started.
Okay, John chapter 4. Now, the stories in John are often kind of centered around Jesus' encounters with people. Like in the beginning, Jesus' first miracle was in the middle of a bunch of people at a wedding in Cana of Galilee. And he goes there and there are unnamed people at an unknown kind of situation. And Jesus had fun. They enjoyed themselves. Jesus may have done a traditional Jewish dance at one of these things. Like, he was a fun guy. The next thing we see is that Jesus is meeting with Nicodemus. And so where the wedding was happening, it was joyous time. Jesus is meeting with Nicodemus is now at night, and it's a private meeting. And Nicodemus is trying to be extra cautious and careful and secretive. Now you get to John chapter 4, and Jesus is meeting with a Samaritan woman at a well in the middle of the day. And so now you've got the whole spectrum. You've got public to private, you've got night, you've got day, you've got in the middle of a city, and you've got outside the city by a well. Wherever people are, that's where Jesus is going. What's interesting is when you read through this story, Jesus is using, again, like with Nicodemus, he's using earthly terminology to discuss really important heavenly things. Like Jackson's going to talk in a minute about water and about food. In the same way that Jesus talks with Nicodemus about salvation being like born again, and Nicodemus is thinking about just being born. Jesus is talking with a woman at the well about living water at a well. So like it's an appropriate place. But she can only think water, and he's trying to talk water. So there's a difference in this. There's also a place to this. Like my favorite part about her story comes in verse number 3, where it says, "He left Judea and departed again to Galilee, but he needed to go through Samaria." So what that means is that Jesus left the southern end of the nation, and he's going back north. But no, it didn't just say he went through Samaria. It says he needed to go through Samaria. Well, why did Jesus need to go through Samaria? Why? Because she was there. He didn't just want to. He didn't just think it was a good idea. This wasn't a whim. He needed to go there. Why? Because she was there. Why? Because he is the good shepherd, and the shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. But Jesus has also told us what the good shepherd will do. He will leave the 99 to go find the one lost. In this story, she's the lost lamb, and the shepherd has left the Jewish people, and he's gone to find the lamb so that he can bring her to himself. He is the good shepherd. Now, Jax, what was your takeaway from this?
Okay, so there's two instances in this chapter where Jesus first compares himself to water, and then in the second part, he compares himself to being food. And what he's really doing here, he's putting this down into more basic terms that we can understand, like I said. And so he brings up these two important things that we can't live without. There's 5 basic needs in life, 2 of them being food and water. And so he brings these 2 up as being some of the most important. And then he presents this idea of salvation that's even more important than that. And he says that a relationship with God, it is your kind of your fuel or whatever takes care of you. That is what you live off of over food and water. It's more important than even that.
That's right. So without food and without water, you what?
You die.
And without Jesus, you will die. But he is the way, the truth, and the life. That's right. And no man comes to the Father except through him. Now, what's good about that and how all that ties in is how when Jesus is talking to that woman at the well, and he's talking with her about religious things, about faith, she starts talking religion. He's talking about faith, she's talking about religion. And she said, "Well, you Jews say that we have to worship at the mountain, but we have always worshiped here." She's talking about religion, he's talking about faith. And he says, the time is coming where those who will worship in spirit and in truth. And so he's telling her who he is so that she can go to the Father. And in this whole story, he is the way, the truth, and the life. No man, in this case, not even this woman, can get to the Father unless she goes through him. And so when you read through this story, she thought that salvation came from what you do and where you worship. He's saying that salvation actually comes from who God is and that he sent his son to them. She's thinking what and where, and he's saying salvation is about who. Now, my favorite part of this story is this other part. Now, you'll notice that Jesus is dealing with Samaritans that the Jews hated, and he's dealing with his own people that the Samaritans weren't fond of. So these two groups didn't get along. You would assume that Jesus' own people would be more receptive to him than the strangers, but actually the opposite happened. Because in verse number 42, it says, then they, these are the people of Samaria, then they said to the woman, now we believe, not because of what you said, for we ourselves have heard him, and we know that this is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world. I mean, revival broke out in this city. The next sentence says, now after the 2 days he departed from there and went to Galilee, for Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country. He came to his own, and his own didn't receive him. And so the Samaritans heard Jesus and believed in him, right? The Galileans grew up with Jesus and they refused to believe. Evidently, seeing is not believing, and seeing did not translate to faith. Jesus is dealing with faith issues here. The way this is illustrated is the story of Jesus' second miracle, the story of the nobleman's son. So this son of this nobleman gets sick. And the nobleman comes to Jesus. A nobleman is a high-ranking, kind of important guy. He comes to Jesus and he says, sir, please come to my house. In the story, he says, please come to my house before my child dies. And Jesus said to him, verse 50, go your way, your son lives. Okay? So the man believed. He believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he went his way. Now, that's powerful. Because these people were seeing and not believing. But this guy, he just heard Jesus say, hey, listen, he's going to be fine. Go home. Everything's okay. And he believed. He believed without seeing. I'm going to tell you, John, remember, is a big fan of the book of Genesis, right? So he's going back. The beginning of John starts out like the beginning of the book of Genesis, in the beginning. John's going to break down the first chapter into singular days, like Moses broke down the days of creation. John here is going back to the story of Abraham, where God speaks to Abraham and sends him out to a country that he had never been to. And he says, well, how do I know how do I know what it is? He says, you won't know till you get there. Just go. And it says, and Abraham believed, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. So he just up and left and just trusted that what God said was going to happen. Because of that, Abraham was God's friend because of his faith. And in this story, this man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he went his way. Jesus is now finding new Abrahams, people who will believe just to walk by faith. And that's what's happening in this story. Whether you're the woman at the well who has to believe that he is the living water, or the nobleman who has to believe that just because he said it, it's true. We must walk by faith. That's what this story is about. I hope you're enjoying it. We'll see you tomorrow in chapter number 5. Bye.